Welcome back. I'm Miss Christina Frost, a sick chick who's been skipping leg day since the 80s. We are going to be tackling the crazy problem of everyone's most beloved autistic character, Sheldon Cooper of The Big Bang. Many fans and experts in the field of autism have analyzed Sheldon's behavior and concluded that he displays many traits commonly associated with autism. For example, individuals with autism often have difficulty with social interactions and the communication. I do not. I can fake it. Sheldon's behavior is too consistent with autism to just be a coincidence. They point to the fact that Sheldon often struggles with social interaction and communication, and he displays many repetitive behaviors and routines commonly associated. So have you watched the whole series? Does somebody want to guess what season he comes out as autistic? Let's have a bit of a multiple choice. Is it A, in childhood, B, when he was finishing his PhD, C, the last season, or D, never? I'm sure maybe his character was inspired by autistic traits, but for the creators to come out and say, Sheldon's autistic, would change the entire dynamic of the show. Things could become very offensive really quickly.
I'm not being weird. It's hard to explain.
Sheldon's quirks are the subject of many of the jokes on the show. If he's just a quirky asshole, his friends are completely justified in making fun of him. If he has autism, his friends making fun of him is something that he has no control over, and they're the assholes instead. It's a pretty big tendency in society to be able to identify autism, but just ignore it, and chalk it up to being weird so they don't have to acknowledge their intolerance.
Well, she might be interested to know that I have refocused my research from bosonic string theory to heterotic string theory.
Yeah, I'll just tell you said hey.
They might have wrote the character with some insufferable and annoying qualities, not realizing that they actually wrote an autistic character. He's autistically coded. The writers may have not done it deliberately, but they can deny it all they want. But it's the worst tropes and stereotypes about autism all combined into one.
Stop yelling! You're making Sheldon cry!
Boy, what got him so upset? Oh, sure, you can tell when Sheldon's upset.
Exhibiting challenging behaviors that are commonly associated with autism, wrongly associated or not, means it's autistically coded. If unintentional, the consequences and stigma are exactly the same. It's like saying, I didn't write this character to be gay. He's just effeminate and promiscuous and definitely not gay.
Leonard, thank you so much.
Sure. Huh. Maybe I am her gay friend.
The trope remains whether the writer put it there or not. And I suspect that's likely because they wanted to write a character who was seen as a typical brainiac scientist with no real social skills. Bill Prady, one of the writers on the show, is autistic. So Bill could have naturally just influenced the scripts as an autistic man himself. Sort of cross-character development a little bit. Have you seen Bones?
I am also fluent in 8 languages.
Whoa.
Really? Well, so am I.
Very impressive for a human.
Robot can recognize facial expressions?
Yeah, better than most people. Amy, please tell us what you observe.
Dr. Brennan appears 78% curious and 22% jealous.
Like Temperance Brennan, the character that's based on the real-life works of Kathy Reichs, a forensic anthropologist, she's autistic, but they never come out and say it in the show. At the time, they didn't think it would be well received. And I think that's the case here, and they would rather not say because they want to keep it as a comedy. As an autistic person who is basically completely opposite of Sheldon Cooper, I find some of it to be very unrelatable. I'm disabled, so I do like medical dramas. Freddie Highmore does a pretty good job of portraying an autistic person with savant syndrome.
So you're treating him like anybody else?
Are you?
Yes, I am. He more than earned the right to be here. He has had to get past people like you and their prejudices every step of the way.
Prejudices?
Yeah, prejudices.
You have any idea how many patients he scared the crap out of today?
So teach him.
I'm doing that. Teaching you both that he doesn't belong.
It's very close to the start of the series when he completely melts down. And you don't often see that portrayed in a positive light. It was seen more as he thinks different, and they kind of explained it on what was going through his head. I'm used to autistic characters just being like uncouth savages that say the wrong thing in every situation. There's a lot of people on the spectrum running around undiagnosed. I've met them. They're my friends, coworkers. They're not tested because they're too high functioning, or their parents just didn't follow up, or they weren't doing bad in school so no one looked at them. Honestly, I think it's rather realistic, especially when the show was filmed. High-functioning people get missed all the time. A lot of people now are getting diagnosed in their 30s and 40s because of the internet. I learned about it from TikTok.
Send me to Canada!
When I first started looking into autism, I became super fixated on it, just like a lot of other autistics do. They hyperfixate on autism. It's their new special interest. I was worried about me self-diagnosing when I was first going into the psychologist, but never once did she talk to me like I did not have it. I guess I smell like autism. We just all fall through the woodwork. There's a lot of discussion on the forums that they talk about Amy's research, but it never mentions autism. There's this idea that a scientist has this mass knowledge of everything, when really, their field of study is pretty focused, with some general knowledge around it, so it's not like Amy could have diagnosed him with autism. It was never her job, and being a neurologist means essentially nothing. Biologists walk by so many plants and they couldn't ID them. It's not like she took it as an elective, and I don't think her being around matters. Unless Sheldon suddenly turns into a smoking monkey.
I recently trained a capuchin monkey to smoke cigarettes.
Have you learned anything?
Yes. He looks much cooler than the non-smoking monkeys.
Sheldon grew up in the 80s in Texas. Not exactly the best place to get diagnosed with autism at the time. That label would have segregated Sheldon and put him in a special classroom, and it was unlikely that he would have been challenged academically if put there. He's always said, "My mother had me tested." But he actually doesn't know the result. If he had, he would have mentioned it. Like, "My mother had me tested for XYZ, and the result was XYZ." But all you hear him say is, "My mother had me tested. I'm not crazy."
I'm not crazy. I don't have to take a pigeon as my bride.
There goes our shot at him living on the roof.
He was the most blessed child. Family and friends even had a whole environment where they were completely supportive, as they should be. Unlike most of our families. Except mine. Thank you guys. And simply no one wanted to argue with him. When you watch young Sheldon, it just enforces the idea that he's autistic. He has a specific schedule that must be followed. He screams and yells when touched, and that's just a start. Nothing wrong with him being autistic. The producers are probably afraid to admit we made him autistic. The TV show itself supports the idea that those whom some non-autistic people call autistic assholes are mostly just a product of bad parenting. From a young age, Sheldon's mother, Mary, took over responsibility and control of his life. She protected him and prevented him from playing with other children, which resulted in a lack of social interaction. This lack of social interactions could have directly contributed to Sheldon's difficulty in comprehending social cues and being empathetic towards others.
Yep, got him. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Hey, have you noticed anything off with Sheldon?
No. Can't say that I have. Why?
He's been awful quiet, and at the risk of being indelicate, he's gone several days without a bowel movement.
How do you know that?
Well, I was worried about him.
Mary encouraged Sheldon to focus on his academic pursuits rather than sports or socializing. With his dad being so into football, I thought he would have pushed his son more. It led him to experience a lack of physical fitness and difficulty forming relationships with others. Meaningful relationships. In some of the later seasons of Big Bang, Sheldon's siblings talk about how their mother neglected them and protected him from a lot of the responsibilities and reality of the real world. But a lot of autistic parents do try and protect their kids. I definitely don't want to say it's the mother's fault, but it's kind of a misogynistic statement as a reflection of the story that puts forward. Parents can be responsible with autistic kids being completely spoiled and becoming a little asshole. They prefer to do that than assume the challenge of raising an autistic kid with different needs. And that way of raising a child would make an asshole out of any kid, neurotypical or not. He grew up in a super religious home. He learned that particular actions were sinful and immoral. This made him very strict in following rules and resistant to new ideas and change. Mary had a significant impact on Sheldon's character in a complicated and diverse manner. Her overprotective nature and strict religious beliefs could have contributed to Sheldon feeling entitled and behaving selfishly at times. This can be traced back to his spoiled upbringings, which is similar to many children on the spectrum. Unfortunately, these kids are just normally labeled as autistic assholes, and maybe they'll grow out of it, when in reality, their behavior is largely influenced by the people that are around them and their upbringing.
When I was your age, I was also taken to a university to be studied.
Because they thought you were really smart?
Because they thought I was clinically insane.
Young Sheldon is a bit more of an arguable case, because childhood autism can just look like developmental delays or other socialization problems.
And it wasn't just me. Did you know that when Albert Einstein was a little boy, his parents worried there was something wrong with him?
Because he couldn't comb his hair?
No, that was a choice he made later in life.
One argument against it is that he doesn't behave like any of his family or the culture he's surrounded with.
When he was young, he wanted nothing to do with other children and would often have extreme temper tantrums.
Sounds like you.
I know. Isn't it great?
At one point, there was a test for him and his sister, and Missy absolutely wipes the floor with Sheldon in EQ, despite being portrayed as the dumb one in the show.
Did you ever think of wearing that white coat with the belt?
No?
You should, because you have a very nice figure, and it's lost in there.
He takes all those questions literally and seems confused at those that require a emotionally driven answer.
Check this out.
Did you see Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
No.
You should, because there's a lot of good science stuff in it.
Sheldon even admits himself that his mother had baby talked and spoiled him his entire life, and it led to him taking things for granted, and this planted the seed of all his problematic behavior. Genes and nurture are how somebody develops, so yes, partially is the mother's fault. She was a pushover the entire time. She never corrects his behavior and just allows it to occur.
Kudos on the question which train gets to St. Louis first.
Stereotypically, he does love trains. We don't all like trains. Young Sheldon even gets a job at a train store, where he info-dumps the customers constantly and playing with his model set whenever he's stressed. Some people don't want the cognitive dissonance of liking a problematic character. Sure, Mom's overprotective, but he's had a lot of close interactions with his twin sister who keeps it real with him, as well as the grandmother who dotes on him but also keeps it real. And a dad that tries to treat him normally, usually. And while the mom is very religious, none of the other characters even close to him are. So by all of this, I don't think Sheldon's problem is nature versus nurture, but rather nurture and nature. His nature provided him with the autistic traits, but the way his parents nurtured his traits by keeping him separate didn't help. The result was a narcissistic egomaniac who doesn't know how to interact with others, who everyone lovingly refers to as Sheldon. The main journey that the characters are going through aren't just learning how to deal with Sheldon, but for Sheldon also to learn how to grow and deal with others. Young Sheldon is more explicitly autistically coded, with more emphasis on the direct thought patterns he has. And he's also less of an ass because, well, he's not old enough to become one yet. He's also a lot less of an asshole because he's surrounded by people who won't let him get away with it. Mary might coddle him, but George has no issue laying down the law. He'll put Sheldon in his place when he acts entitled, and Georgie and Missy both prove themselves. Georgie outright admitted that dealing with Sheldon's quirks actually made him better equipped to become a father. So bad parenting does not cause autistic traits, but bad parenting is the key to developing terrible personalities in both neurotypicals and autistics. Because it's easier than doing the work of raising a child with different needs. However these traits may be, manipulative behavior, narcissistic behavior, vindictive, belittling, it can be present in both autistic and neurotypicals. A lot of parents that have a suspected child with autism actually don't want the diagnosis because they don't want him to think that he's weird or different, so they just never tell him. So it's possible for this person to go through a spoiled and separated upbringing while also being autistic. It's not a mutually exclusive one or the other occurrence. In fact, most parents are inclined to spoil, smother, and overprotect their autistic kids as a sense of care because they show signs of a delay in some sort, socially, developmentally. That communication gap needs to be closed. Some parents are purposely setting up their children for failure, just because it's easier to spoil them than argue with them. All of his friends are pretty patient with his behaviors, however much they irritated and annoyed them. As the series progressed and they got older and more mature, they all seemed to be a bit more understanding about things and even defending him when the situation called for it.
Sit on the damn couch.
Nope.
What do you mean, nope? What's wrong with it?
Nothing. It's what's wrong with him.
Throughout the series, they managed to treat Sheldon as he wanted to be treated, like an eccentric genius.
It's exactly the same.
Penny, I think I know what to do. Sheldon, I have some bad news.
More?
And also giving him the normalcy that he needed to keep him grounded. There's numerous times where you see Leonard is just so frustrated and it seems like the friendship is going to end, but yet it stays going.
You know the cashew chicken I get you on Monday nights?
Yes, from Szechuan Palace.
Szechuan Palace closed 2 years ago.
What? Where did my cashew chicken come from?
Golden Dragon.
Everybody wanted to take the plane, but Sheldon wanted to take the train. So we took the train.
No. Oh, this isn't right. No, our food always comes in Szechuan Palace containers.
They do treat him with a lot of care and patience, and he can get away with almost anything anywhere.
Yeah, well, before they went out of business, I bought 4,000 containers.
But, oh, this changes everything.
The only person that wouldn't accept him as Raj's girlfriend, Emily. She represented those in the community that don't care about the personality disorder as an excuse to be mean. It's a bit different if someone outside of the group is making fun of him compared to someone inside the group making fun of him. That's when they all get really mad because they're actually being the jerk. They all know him, break bread with him, and do all sorts of things to appease him. They have every right to joke with him, about him, and at him, because it doesn't come from a place of like non-understanding and bigotry. Have you noticed that at no point, none of his closest friends mentioned he should go see a therapist or doctor for it? It's damaging to everyone involved if the traits like this would just be ignored and nobody really cares about other people around them. Saying like, oh, that's just Sheldon. Of course that's just Sheldon. But you would think at some point in that period of time his friends would care enough to say, maybe you should go get some help. He's very routined and does not deal with changes well. Does he have a real life example of a meltdown? No. It's a TV show. A sitcom, no less. Instead, he has a little bit of a hissy fit, or they make light jokes about him on the show. And be understanding and accommodating when the need is.
Wait, Leonard, are you gonna have another one of your hissy fits?
Hissy fits? I have hissy fits?
Yes, and I have a theory why. Because of your lactose intolerance, you switched over to soy milk. Soy contains estrogen-mimicking compounds. I think your morning Cocoa Puffs are turning you into a hysterical woman.
That alone enough is a reason to avoid confirming that he's autistic. Doing that would involve a shitload of backlash from people that just think they used it at the expense of an autistic character. Everyone in there is a trope. They all make jokes about one another. The truth is, you can joke about anything, but someone on that target group will always laugh, and some that are hurt. That's life. I really don't like how Sheldon tends to be mean and vindictive towards Howard. He kind of treats him like a lesser human most of the time. He's extremely happy with using other people for his benefit and abuses Leonard whenever he can. He states multiple times in a very polite manner that he has issues. Yet everyone, even after knowing him for years, keep expecting him to just act normal. And they keep blaming him for shit that he has no control over. Even if he isn't on the spectrum, everyone except for Leonard is being incredibly inconsiderate and mean to him. Not all geniuses are autistic, but a lot of them sure are. Sheldon is textbook autistic. He has sensory processing disorder and thinks very literally. He hates change, loves rules, and strictly adheres to things that most people would not even think to do.
Yes, I hear a little hum. Refrigerators make noise, Sheldon.
This is new. It's never made this sound before. We should call a repairman.
He took the entire fridge apart in young Sheldon because he couldn't handle the noise of the buzzing somewhere.
I'm not spending money on a fridge that's working.
Then think of it as spending money on my mental stability.
Ignore it, Sheldon.
Ignoring things that irritate me isn't my strong suit.
Not everyone who is eccentric is on the spectrum, and not everyone's behaviors have to be explained. Sometimes people can just have odd quirks and personality, or none. So he seems to have a lot of narcissistic traits and very obviously savant syndrome. So his autism is either one of the worst portrayals of autism I've ever seen, or he just has narcissistic personality disorder. According to the writers, he's not autistic. He's just a narcissistic, selfish asshole a lot of the time. If the writers and creators say he isn't autistic, then he's not. No matter how much he may seem it at times. It's up to them, not us. And they say he's not. It's a lot easier to tolerate his personality when you think he is. But because the show says he's not, that really makes you understand how much of an asshole he really is. The problem is he's a fictional character, and he has fictional character creation syndrome. He is whatever the writers want at the time and whatever the plot needs to be. It may even look like real life conditions, parallel to your life. So what we see is heavily narrativized. Poor cross sections of their life. Fictional characters kinda deviate from real life conditions because backstories are compelling, and usually fictional characters have a very complete and clear backstory. People end up thinking that you're either a total genius or a brain failure. Some neurodivergents can be great and talented within their selected fields. It's not automatic that they're dumb either. Or they can be both, like Elon Musk. They can't say Sheldon is not on the spectrum and just quirky, so there's nothing actually wrong with him, and then at the same time give him sincere moments, like when they throw him a party and he locks himself in the bathroom, or him telling Amy that despite their lack of physical intimacy, he finds their relationship to be very intimate. If he's just quirky and something he just does for the heck of it, it makes all of those softer moments when he struggles with his own condition mean nothing. Then that means he's just a huge fraud, basically. I think I remember an interview when Jim Parsons said that he played Sheldon as being on the spectrum. Making fun of Sheldon and laughing at him is half the show's jokes. Those jokes would not be acceptable if he was outright labeled as autistic instead of maybe just weird and eccentric. The show would have crashed without the jokes. While he isn't unnecessarily an unrealistic representation of autism, he definitely is a stereotypical one. Let's see how many tropes he fits. He's sex-repulsed, immature, childish, germaphobe, a genius with eidetic memory, who has no empathy, is selfish, and inconsiderate. He thinks he's better than everyone else, and he's always right. For God's sake, the guy has a special interest in trains. Just because these things aren't stereotypes doesn't mean that autistic people are like that. And vice versa. Just because there are autistic people like that doesn't mean those things are stereotypes. His character is very much of a spoiled autistic child. His autism traits and spoiled traits are not mutually exclusive, and they tend to coexist in both show runs. I've also met very spoiled autistic adults, and Sheldon fits that bill too. And me, probably. Sheldon, as a character, might not have wanted to be identified as autistic. Autism had a bad rap back then, and Sheldon might have feared that people might focus on his disability rather than his genius. For example, when he showed Amy his storage locker, he was scared of what she might think of him.
Welcome to my fortress of shame.
I'm sorry, what am I looking at?
Basically everything I've ever owned.
Which implies he was ashamed of what he perceives as a weakness.
I would like to tell you that there is nothing here to be ashamed of. So I'm gonna need a minute.
By him not getting any help or suggestions that he should get help, kinda like they're trying to say, accept people for who they are, no matter how much pain or havoc they cause. Which isn't fair for either party. They're all scientists, yet they all act completely out of touch with reality. He's not crazy. His mom had him tested, but she didn't actually follow up with the specialist in Houston. Sheldon doesn't have a mental illness, he's just a selfish guy with a lack of empathy. It was addressed in the series finale, and he's working on it. Behavioral issues aren't a problem that are solved overnight. It takes time, and he's working on it. Being tested for craziness is one completely different than being tested for autism. If you're being treated for mental health, autism is probably not even going to be under their radar because it's not exactly a mental health condition. And I kind of feel like the show ignores the fact that there are at least 2 other characters that are likely autistic, minimum. Leonard and Sheldon's girlfriend. Not only did they miss the boat with him, but they also missed the boat with all of them, and it's not just one set of behaviors. They could have showed an entire spectrum, but they didn't. Rather, they just normalized it through comedy, and we laugh at it unless it hits home. And I believe it's 2 times in young Sheldon that Asperger's was actually mentioned. The reason for that, back in the 80s, we did not have autism spectrum disorder. It was Asperger's syndrome. Autism was still diagnosed, but it was considered a severe form of Asperger's. So those that are diagnosed with the form of Asperger's back then might not want to be associated with the name of autism yet. They were considered high functioning before, but now they're getting put in a different category. It'll take another few decades until all those old guys die off and that's not used anymore, but until then, you're gonna hear it. What's considered higher functioning forms of autism weren't included in the DSM until 1994. But that doesn't excuse Sheldon Cooper as being a poorly written, ableist caricature of an autistic person. Well, if an autistic person who thinks something is harmful to autistic people still endorses it, I'm not going to take their claims too seriously since you clearly aren't. If someone stood outside of McDonald's and told me that the food was poisoned, I'm not going to take their claims too seriously if they come in after me and order some. It's not like there's no one in the world just like Sheldon. We are normal people, we're not aliens, and Sheldon in no way needed to be excessively babied. The way the other characters treat him is mostly fine. They misunderstand him and get annoyed at certain things that are autistic behaviors, but that's the only place where they're considered wrong in the way that they deal with things. Part of his personality is that he's a prick. Not all of it is autism or OCD, so the characters are right to challenge him at times. It's a different wiring of the brain. It's not cancer. It's not a disease. It's not brain damage. It's like saying Android phones are autistic because they don't work like iPhones. Like, it's okay for everything not to be an iPhone. And it's okay as an autistic person to modify your quirks so you can sort of function as a real person in society. Just because it's not accurate for you doesn't mean it's accurate to someone else. Many autistic people have long advocated for the term low functioning and high functioning to be abandoned due to its inaccuracy. Using this sort of functioning terminology comes with the assumptions of someone's capabilities that may not match what the individual actually is capable of. And then this post is by an obsessed superfan of The Big Bang. The show gets a lot of hate, especially from the autistic community for their portrayal of Sheldon Cooper. This is a diagnosed autistic's perspective on why I love The Big Bang Theory. I believe people, especially in the community, have judged it unfairly. They didn't label him as autistic because they didn't want to offend autistic people with the stereotype representation of what autism looks like. We, the viewers, have often viewed this show as harmful to our community because the portrayal of autism, but it wasn't actually meant as a portrayal of autism. In the recent book, The Big Bang Theory, the definitive inside story of the hit series, an oral history of the show, compiled of hundreds if not thousands of hours of interviews with the cast and writers. Bill Prady said in writing Sheldon's character, he was inspired to pursue an autism diagnosis on himself, and was later diagnosed, because he saw some of the traits parallel between him and Sheldon. And Sheldon is not the only one that gets made fun of for his behaviors. Penny's the dumb blonde, Leonard's the people pleaser with mommy issues, Sheldon is the painfully obvious narcissist, Raj is the feminine foreigner, Howard is a creepy, success-obsessed Jew. I love these portrayals because the characters are essentially meant to be seen as a bunch of different stereotypes all coming together. And over time, they became more than the stereotypes. The dumb blonde becomes a successful pharmaceutical sales rep and strong, confident wife. The people pleaser with mommy issues becomes the scientist that is comfortable with himself and has worked hard to heal and be a good husband. And the painfully obvious narcissist learns how to love someone outside of him and appreciate his family and friends for the contributions to his life. The feminine foreigner learns to embrace his femininity and masculinity, and that he doesn't have to be in a relationship to be the defier of his happiness. The creepy, sex-obsessed Jew becomes an admirable father and has a marriage that has shaped him in so many ways. And she's gorgeous. Characters have to start with extremes, and good storytelling means giving the characters dynamic personalities. The worse off a character is in the beginning, the more room there is for character and growth development as the story progresses. Concluding, Sheldon is a fictional character played by an actor, exaggerated for the screen. You may think that the portrayal of the fictional character looks a lot like autism, but that doesn't mean he is autistic. The only thing we know is that we don't know whether Sheldon is on the spectrum or not. While some of his observed actions may hint at such a disorder, we are absolutely not able to derive an absolute yes or no by what we observe in the series. Not everyone who is constantly inattentive has ADHD. Not everyone who is socially awkward is on the spectrum. That's why it's a spectrum. We share a fundamental blueprint, but after that, it's all aftermarket parts. I found it way easier to deal with society when I started identifying as autistic. I was no longer wondering what's wrong with me. Am I having the right diagnosis? Am I on the right medication? Now I'm just like, I'm different. Some people see some of my quirks and there's kind of a butting heads. So now after explaining I'm autistic, I am more likely to make a middle ground with the other person. And there's gonna be less tension overall. The good tip for watching the show is to not diagnose any characters or see them through the lens of any real-world condition. I accept the oddity as part of the comedy, just like I was watching Rick and Morty. The writers say Sheldon isn't autistic, but the actor says he plays him as if he was autistic. Simple as that. Don't look at Sheldon as a person, or hold him to any moral standards. He's just a tool for executives to sell views, and to tell situational stories preying on common stereotypes, themes, prejudice, biases, and seeking views. It is just as gross and problematic as The Biggest Loser or any of the other TLC shows that isn't actually learning anymore. It's a show to echo our own toxic views back at ourselves. Some autistic people are assholes. Some assholes are autistic. The two are not mutually exclusive. So let's get with the times and keep the ass in Asperger's instead.